those. And if anybody listens to anything, I'm sure the front of the class is always performing later, right before the quiz. So this is me. I'm a developer advocate for Google, which means I speak to primarily external engineers about our platforms and products that they can build for. You can find me online, and I encourage you to do so. If you have any questions that we don't get to here in the demo pod later, please find me online. I have a Buzz and a Twitter that I check rather frequently, and they're both up there. Also, feel free to use this hashtag if you do some tweeting. It's G-Egypt. And also I have a URL up there that goes to these slides. So if you'd like to check out these slides later, check out that URL. It goes to the Google HTML5 site that has all my slides. Alright, so in this section, we've got a little bit of time to talk about open standards. We're going to then move into talking briefly about Google Buzz and how we implement some of these open standards we'll talk about. And then I've got some key messages at the end. So really just 3 big points and we'll move on. So first off, open standards. The question that I always begin with when talking about open standards is why. And this is really super important. Because open standards are not a given. It's not always important to use an open standard. Sometimes the open standards that are available are wrong for what you're doing, or they're not available. So every time that you're building an application, you need to ask yourself the question, why should I use this open standard kind of view? And at Google, we do this a lot. In fact, we did it with Google Buzz API, and that's what I'm going to talk about. It's sort of our decision process in choosing to use several open standards for the social web in building the Google Buzz API. The first step in evaluating open standards for use is looking at their value proposition. And it's interestingly enough, the value proposition for open standards is very similar to the value proposition for open source. That party over there, Karen. And what is the value proposition for open source? Now, Chris Development just went into great detail about open source. I'm going to kind of gloss over it a little more quickly. When talking about open source, of course, we're talking about open as in free and accessible and all that. What are a couple of the main points for open source that make it an important technology to use? And to drive this discussion, I have mugs to give away. And there's one that I'll give you. One is freedom. Yeah? The freedom that this Chris talked about a lot. The freedom to do what you want with the software you have. Yeah? The freedom to contribute to that open source system and make that software better for everyone. It's probably the first and most important definitive of open source in my heart. What's sort of another really big good reason to use open source? Yes? Okay, that's in freedom, right? The freedom to edit the software yourself, but it's definitely a very good point. Yes? Collaboration. I like it. So community is super important. I'm really scared of that speaker. Community is really very important, right? It's not just you. I'll have more questions later, I promise. It's not just you working on software. There's a whole world out there of people also working on the software. And that's just really great because it means it's not just up to you to make the software better. It's not just up to some big software giant with resources. Anybody in the world who thinks that they can do a better job or help make the software better can contribute. And that also gives the software the ability to be edited and focused for a lot of different groups and interests around the world. So it's not just what you want it for, it's what everybody wants in the software. So these two things are also part of open standards. Open standards, they're open. They're much like the open source. You have freedom to contribute to the spec. And there's a whole community working on the spec. So those are really great. Plus two more things. With open standards, we greatly simplify the landscape. Why is this? This is because because instead of a different data format for every application that's communicating essentially the same data, we can use just one data format. So when you're building your application, it needs to be data from all these other applications. You only need to learn a single data format. That greatly simplifies the landscape. There's one thing to learn instead of 20 things to learn. And the other thing is interoperability. To exchange data between applications, if they have to translate between different formats, that's more work. More work means it's going to take longer to write the application, and it's going to be into it in the long run. So between freedom, community, simplification, and interoperability, the long view open standards is really good. Of course, sometimes we want to do things for which there are no specifications or standards yet. When that happens, you have a number of interesting choices. But the main point that I want to get across is that where standards exist, if you use them instead of rolling your own, your life will be better. And everybody else's life will be better. That's pretty cool. So I'm going to talk about a few specific open standards that are really important for the social web. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. We're not going to have time at the end of questions and answers, but I'm going to be in Nelapod most of the afternoon, and I would love to take questions over there. So let's just jump right in and look at OAuth. Who is familiar with the open standard OAuth? Just a couple of you. All right. So this is relatively new, but it's really super important. OAuth allows you as an application developer to gain access to a user's data via an API in a convenient and secure way. What does that mean? Long ago, the way we used to get access to somebody's data is asking a password, which is super lengthy, right? You don't want to keep a user's password for another application. But that's what we used to do. We ask for the password, we log in on behalf of them, we scrape the data to download the system. Then we got a little trickier. The user was given an API key, so they would log into the foreign service, copy something, go back to our application, paste that key in, and their application has access to the API, which is nice. But it's still pretty late for the user. They have to take a whole bunch of extra steps. And as we know, we build web applications. The more sign-on steps we have, the more dropouts we get during the capture period, right? So fewer steps, easier path for the user is better. So we came up with OAuth, which is this way to send a user to the foreign service, authorize them on that foreign service, and then send them back to our application. So they're logging into the service itself. You don't have to capture any passwords. You tell the service what you want access to, and it presents that to the user. It says, this application would like access to your contacts. Right? The user either authorizes or denies that, and then the application sends the user back to your application. The great thing about this is that you don't have to leave any passwords. The flow is really super easy for the user. And you're able to limit the access scope. So instead of giving the user giving you access to everything, they just give you access to what your application is asking for. Does that sound interesting? Sort of. Okay. It's super good. And there's another interesting bit of data in here called the password anti-problem. That's a longer conversation. We'll talk about that in a minute. I'd like to go over the flow and go off just to see what that looks like. Then this can get a bit technical, but just concentrate on the major points if you're interested in sort of the overview. Pretty much get access through OAuth. This is how it works. Your application will ask for an unauthorized request token. Your application then sends the user to the service provider with the token. Right? So over here, the blue, this is your application, and the red, that's the foreign service to service provider. The service identifies your application with an authorized purpose token, which are app exchanges for an access token. And that access token gives it access to the data. Alright, so it's just a quick back and forth. Application said, gets the unauthorized token, sends the user, comes back with an authorized token, exchange that, and now you can access it. Right. Now this overview is nice with graphics. How this actually looks in code can get a little bit messy with no auto. That's why we provide client libraries for a lot of our APIs that deal with all the dirty stuff. So if you end up doing co-op, instead of writing to read from these endpoints yourself, I recommend using a client library to take care of it. That's over. Next up is Adam. Who here knows Adam? Right, keep your hands up. We're going to do a little experiment here. Who here has ever read a web blog? Right, who here has been writing more than 10 websites on the other? Okay, you've all encountered Adam at one point or another. It's sort of a silent heavyweight in the room. Right? Adam is an encapsulation format for data syndication. That means if I write a blog and I've got these entries, when those entries get syndicated out to something like Google Reader, the transport data type is Adam. Because all these blogs use Adam, we can have something like Google Reader. If they were all using their own independent data formats, then something like Reader would be extremely difficult to do. So I'm just going to show you what Adam looks like. Here we are, a big bunch of goo. When I first saw Adam, I got the same feeling as when I first saw HTML. What is this? But if you look at it carefully and slowly, you can strip out a lot of the stuff that doesn't matter. Right? There's extra extensions that you don't really need. And then we can look and just say the required elements. This is Adam. The feed for each entry, all you really need are an ID, an updated, and a title. The ID is a unique identifier. The updated is the time that this was last modified. The title is the title of the post. And then there's some optional items as well. In this case, we've got author and we've got a link back to the post. So you can see Adam is actually a really simple format. We just sort of added a lot of extra stuff for increased functionality. So even though there's all this goo, people using something like Adam really only have to look for and only have to expect a few different fields. So that's Adam. Alright, this is my favorite one to talk about because it has the coolest thing of them all. This is Hub Sub Hub. Who has heard of Hub Sub Hub? One. We got one. That's awesome. Okay, so Hub Sub Hub is super cool and you're going to see it a lot more. It's really, really important for the social web, and I'd say the web in general. It's all about real-time syndication. So what do I mean by that? The way we used to do this is with polling. And what would happen is we as an application developer would say every 30 seconds, ask the provider of the data, do you have any new data? 30 seconds later, we'd ask again. 30 seconds later, we'd ask again. And we came up with all sorts of interesting algorithms like exponential backlog to make this like a reasonable procedure. But at the end of the day, it came down to the fact that you're taking a cross-country road trip and there's a kid in the back who's always asking, are we there yet? It's really bothersome, and it's not terribly efficient. So what we came up with is this protocol called Hub Sub Hub that makes it real time, uses these stat things, give you that data as it is written, as it is published. So this is what it looks like. We've got three major elements: a publisher, a subscriber, and a hub, which is your name, right? Hub, sub, hub, and then the hub is just for fun. This is what the flow looks like. The subscriber will ask the publisher for their latest content. The publisher will respond. And in the case of a Hub Sub Hub in a native feed, there'll be an element in there saying, hey, I've got a Hub Sub Hub. Right? And if our subscriber knows about Hub Sub Hub, it will see that and will initiate the subscription flow. Right? If it doesn't know, if the subscriber doesn't know you have to feel like